Across the rural South, thousands of small houses once shared a peculiar feature: two front doors. They stood side by side beneath the same porch, often only a few feet apart. Each door opened directly into a different room, and in many houses there was no interior doorway connecting those rooms at all. To move from one side of the house to the other, you had to step outside. Today, these buildings are easily mistaken for old duplexes, primitive cabins, or badly altered farmhouses. But they belong to a distinct southern house type known as the double pen house. From the Appalachian foothills to the Ozarks and across parts of Tennessee, Kentucky, Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, and Arkansas, these modest buildings sheltered generations of small farmers, laborers, tenants, and sharecroppers. At first, the two-room house represented progress. It offered more space than a single-room cabin. It provided a little separation between sleeping and entertaining, adults and children, family and visitors. Its full porch suggested permanence, hospitality, and basic respectability. But that tidy facade concealed a harder reality. Behind the two doors were cramped rooms, cold winters, punishing summers, and a domestic workload that never ended. In plantation districts, the same inexpensive design could also serve a different purpose, providing landlords with just enough housing to keep workers tied to the land. The house promised independence. For many of the people living inside it, independence remained out of reach. So why did these houses have two front doors? How did two simple rooms become one of the South's most widespread forms of working-class housing? And why have so many disappeared while the mansions built from the same rural economy are carefully preserved? The answer begins with something smaller still: a single room in the woods. In the early 19th century, families moving into the upland South often built with what the land provided. Timber was abundant. Cash was not. There were few architects, few formal building plans, and, in many isolated areas, little access to processed lumber. A family might own an axe, an adze, a saw, a few iron tools, and whatever hardware could be purchased or traded at a distant store. The first house was therefore rarely ambitious. It was a box made from logs. Builders called that basic unit a pen. A typical pen might measure roughly 16 to 20 feet across. Trees were felled nearby, stripped, cut to length, and notched at the corners. The logs were stacked horizontally, with gaps filled using wood, clay, stone, or other available material. A gable roof kept off rain. An exterior chimney supplied heat and a place to cook. Openings for a door and perhaps one or two small windows completed the structure. This single pen was not merely a bedroom or a kitchen, it was the entire house. Cooking took place near the fire. Meals were eaten in the same space. Adults worked, children played, and nearly everyone slept within sight or sound of everyone else. Furniture had to justify the room it occupied. Beds might line the walls. A table served for cooking, eating, sewing, and repairing tools. Chairs were few. Clothes hung from pegs. Food, cookware, and household possessions were stored wherever space could be found. The single-pen house has often been romanticized as the birthplace of frontier independence. It appears in paintings and historical displays as the humble beginning from which determined families rose into prosperity. The imagery is warm: firelight on log walls, handmade furniture, smoke curling from a stone chimney. The reality was less sentimental. A one-room house offered almost no privacy. Illness could not be isolated. A crying infant woke everyone. Adults could not hold a private conversation without lowering their voices. Smoke escaped imperfectly. Rain found weaknesses in the roof. Cold entered through the walls and floor. The structure survived because the family constantly worked to keep it alive. Logs had to be rechinked. Roof shingles had to be replaced. Chimneys cracked. Foundations shifted. Firewood had to be cut, split, dried, and carried inside before winter. Still, the single pen offered something essential. It could be built without a mortgage, without an architect, and often without waiting for a distant supplier. It translated labor directly into shelter, and when a family grew or when a little more money became available, the house could grow with it. The most logical addition was not a hallway or a second floor, it was another pen, placed directly beside the first. The roof was extended, a second room appeared, and because each pen had originally been entered from outside, the enlarged house often kept two separate front doors. That practical decision created one of the most recognizable facades in Southern vernacular architecture. It also created the appearance of a much more orderly life. To a family accustomed to living in one room, a second room was transformative. The house had not doubled its comfort in every sense, but it had doubled the number of spaces in which life could be arranged. One room might become the principal sleeping area. The other could serve as a hall, sitting room, or parlor, a place where visitors were received, meals were served, and the family presented its most respectable face. This did not mean the parlor remained untouched like the formal room of a wealthy Victorian home. In a small rural household, every space still had to work. Beds might appear there when relatives visited, children might sleep on pallets on the floor, tools or food could be moved inside during severe weather. But the idea of separation mattered. There was now a room that could be cleaned before Sunday visitors arrived, a room where better chairs, family photographs, a Bible, a clock, or a treasured piece of furniture could be displayed. The second pen allowed residents to distinguish between ordinary life and the version of life shown to outsiders. The facade reinforced that distinction. Two doors stood beneath a shared porch. In some households, one was associated with the more formal room and the other with daily family use. A neighbor arriving after church might be directed through the parlor entrance. Children returning muddy from the yard could be sent through the other door. But this was not a universal rule. Practices differed from family to family. The two doors also improved ventilation and made it easier to enter whichever room was being used. In a house with no hallway, and sometimes no internal connection between the rooms, both doors were simply necessary. That is the first mystery solved. The house did not usually have two doors because it was a duplex. It had two doors because it had been assembled from two separate room units, each with its own direct entrance. The layout was modular before that word became fashionable. Builders did not begin with an abstract idea of style. They began with the pen, a manageable structural unit, and combined it according to need. One pen created a cabin. Two pens side by side created a double pen house. Move the pens apart and cover the space between them, and the result was a related but different type. The dog trot house, with an open breezeway through the center. Place the two rooms around a central chimney, and the house could become a saddlebag form. Arrange the rooms one behind another instead of side by side, and the logic began moving toward the shotgun house. These forms are often confused today because they shared materials, climates, and occupants, but their floor plans worked differently. The shotgun house extended front to back. The dog trot opened through the middle. The double pen house spread across the front, presenting two doors to the road beneath one long porch. That broad face gave a surprisingly small house a more substantial appearance. Many early examples occupied less than roughly 600 square feet. Yet from a distance, two doors, two windows, and a full porch could suggest balance and permanence. The architecture made a quiet statement. This was no longer a temporary cabin. This was a proper home. But the word proper can conceal almost as much as it reveals. The extra room provided choices but not necessarily comfort, and the facade's promise of privacy often dissolved the moment the door was opened. Stand inside an unrestored double-pen house and the first impression is usually scale. The rooms are not large. Even where the overall building stretches 30 or 40 feet across, walls, fireplaces, and household possessions divide the available space quickly. In the earlier houses, the logs remain visible. In later examples, they may be hidden beneath boards, plaster, or wallpaper. Some houses that appear to be ordinary frame cottages are actually log structures wearing newer skins. One pen might contain the main fireplace and family table. The other might hold several beds. But these functions were flexible. Families adapted the house according to season, household size, and circumstance. During winter, people gathered near the heat. Beds might be moved closer to the fire. Curtains or quilts could be hung to trap warmth or create an illusion of privacy. During summer, doors and windows remained open whenever weather allowed. The front porch became another room because the interior could be oppressively hot. Insulation was minimal or non-existent. In cold months, air entered through floorboards, walls, and door frames. A fire heated the space immediately around it, but much of that heat escaped through the chimney and roof. Keeping two rooms warm could require considerably more fuel than heating one. That meant more trees felled, more wood cut, and more hours spent splitting and carrying it. Modern images of a cheerful rural fireplace often omit the labor required to keep it burning. Wood did not appear beside the hearth by itself. It had to be collected before the cold arrived. Children might gather smaller pieces while adults handled heavier cutting. Ashes had to be removed, chimneys had to be watched for sparks and cleaned to reduce the risk of fire. Cooking added another layer of difficulty. In early houses, food was prepared over the fireplace. Later, wood-burning stoves offered more control, but they still filled the room with heat during summer. This encouraged some families to move cooking into rear sheds, detached kitchens, or later additions. Separating the stove from the main rooms reduced smoke and heat, but it also made domestic movement more complicated. The house was only one part of a much larger working environment. Behind it might stand a smokehouse, barn, corn crib, privy, chicken enclosure, cellar, and garden. A path led to a well, spring, or creek. Another path led toward the fields. There was rarely a basement containing all the building's support systems. The infrastructure was spread across the property. Water came from outside. Food storage took place in outbuildings or cellars. Laundry required carrying water, heating it, and handling clothing without mechanical assistance. Every ordinary action involved distance and physical effort. A glass of water began at the well. A warm room began in the woodlot. A clean shirt began with hauling, heating, scrubbing, rinsing, wringing, and drying. The architecture did not eliminate this labor. It organized where the labor occurred. The clean front porch faced the road. The ash pile, kitchen yard, livestock, and water path remained largely behind the house. The facade showed order. The rear landscape revealed the work required to produce it, and much of that work fell to women and children. Architecture is often discussed as though a house works automatically once construction is complete, but the double-pen house depended on human energy more completely than almost any modern dwelling. There was no thermostat maintaining temperature, no tap delivering water, no refrigerator protecting food, no washing machine, no electric light extending the day without smoke, oil, or flame. The building functioned because its occupants supplied the missing machinery with their bodies. Women typically carried much of the domestic burden. They cooked, washed, preserved food, mended clothing, cared for children, and tried to keep dust, mud, insects, and animals from overwhelming the small rooms. This work did not end at the walls. The porch was swept, water was carried, vegetables were grown and processed, chickens were fed, milk was handled, ashes were dumped, soap might be made, bedding was aired outside. Children entered this system early. They carried kindling, fetched water, watched younger siblings, helped with food preparation and worked in gardens or fields. On small farms, the idea of separate household and agricultural labor barely existed. The family moved between both. A woman might spend the morning cooking and as washing, work part of the day in a field or garden, return to prepare another meal, and continue sewing or mending after dark. In tenant and sharecropping households, the pressure could be even greater. The family's economic survival depended on producing a crop on land it did not own. Field labor consumed the hours and energy that might otherwise have gone into repairing the house. A leaking porch roof could not always be fixed immediately. Rot at the foundation might be ignored until the floor began to sag. Missing boards were patched with whatever was available. The condition of the house could then be blamed on the occupants, even when those occupants lacked ownership, money, or permission to make substantial improvements. This pattern was common in unequal housing systems. A landlord provided inexpensive shelter. The tenant supplied the labor that kept it habitable. If the building deteriorated, responsibility could be shifted downward onto the family living inside it. The house, therefore, had two different economic meanings. For an owner-builder, the double-pen form could represent gradual advancement. A family used its own labor and materials to expand a cabin into something larger. For a landowner housing tenants, the same simplicity reduced cost. 2 rooms, a roof, and a porch were enough to keep a household near the fields without investing in better housing or transferring control of the land. The form itself was not oppressive. Its meaning depended on who owned it, who lived there, and who possessed the right to change it. That distinction is crucial. A humble self-built house on family land could be a source of pride and independence. An almost identical house supplied as part of a labor arrangement could reinforce dependency. From the road, they might look the same. The deed told a different story. The porch was the double-pen house's most important shared space. Both doors opened onto it. If the 2 rooms lacked an internal connection, the porch effectively became the hallway. To move between pens, a resident stepped outside, crossed a few feet under the roof, and entered again. This seems inconvenient by modern standards, but in the context of the rural South, the porch performed far more than a circulation function. It shaded the front wall, reducing direct summer heat. It protected both entrances from rain. It offered a place to complete tasks that were too messy, hot, or crowded for the interior. Corn could be shelled there, beans could be snapped, clothing could be mended, tools could be repaired, children could be watched while adults worked. At the end of the day, the porch became a social room. People sat where the air moved more freely. Neighbors paused at the steps. News traveled along roads and footpaths. Courtship took place within view of family members. Traveling salesmen, preachers, or relatives might be received without immediately entering the private rooms. The porch regulated access. A visitor could be welcomed onto it but not invited farther. Someone considered family might use the everyday door. A formal guest might enter the better room. A stranger might remain outside entirely. The 2 doors allowed the household to choreograph these interactions, even if the rules were never as rigid as later folklore sometimes suggests. The porch also displayed respectability. Floors were swept, chairs were arranged, a potted plant, clean curtain, or freshly whitewashed wall could communicate that the household maintained standards despite limited means. This mattered in rural communities where reputation influenced credit, marriage, employment, and mutual assistance. A family's home was read by other people. The condition of the yard suggested discipline. The porch suggested hospitality. The better room suggested aspiration. The house may have been materially modest, but its occupants could still control how that modesty was presented. This is where the double-pen house becomes more than an exercise in cheap construction. It was an instrument of dignity. People used its symmetry and separation to create social distinctions their income barely supported. One door could say, "This is where work happens." The other could say, "This is how we wish to be seen." But that public order did not remove the private strain. Large families still crowded into small rooms. Boarders or seasonal workers might sleep wherever space could be created. Extended relatives could arrive after illness, crop failure, or bereavement. The second pen allowed the household to absorb more people. It also allowed more people to be placed inside the same small structure. An architectural improvement could therefore become another way of stretching limited resources. 2 rooms were better than 1. They were not the same thing as adequate housing. After the Civil War, the rural South entered a new economic order that was new in law but often familiar in its distribution of power. Slavery had ended. The plantation landscape remained. Formerly enslaved families sought land, autonomy, and the ability to control their own labor. Some acquired farms. Many did not. Across large parts of the South, tenant farming and sharecropping expanded. Under these systems, families worked land owned by someone else. In exchange, they paid rent in money, labor, or a portion of the crop. Housing was often included as part of the arrangement. The buildings varied widely. Some tenants lived in former slave quarters. Others occupied cabins, dog trots, frame cottages, or double-pen houses. The precise use of double-pen houses differed by region, and surviving records do not always identify the exact floor plan of every tenant dwelling. But the type fit the economic logic perfectly. It was inexpensive. It could be built using known local methods. It required few specialized materials. It housed a family close to the fields. And because the landlord owned the structure, the occupants' security remained connected to their labor relationship. Losing the crop could mean losing income. Losing the tenancy could mean losing the house. This gave landowners power that extended beyond the working day. The tenant's workplace and home were part of the same agreement. Debt deepened the dependency. A family might purchase food, seed, or supplies on credit, expecting to repay the account when the crop was sold. The landowner or merchant often controlled the bookkeeping. A poor harvest, low market prices, or disputed expenses could leave the family owing more at the end of the year than at the beginning. The house provided shelter, but it could also help hold the system together. It kept labor physically located on the property. It reduced the landlord's need to pay wages sufficient for independent housing. It made leaving difficult, especially for families with few alternative places to go. The 2 doors could still symbolize respectability, but the larger economic arrangement limited what that respectability could achieve. A family could sweep the porch, improve the garden, and repair the walls. It could make the house feel like home. Yet the deed might remain in someone else's name. This contradiction affected both black and white rural families, though race determined the severity and legal structure of inequality. Poor white tenants faced debt, insecurity, and social stigma. African American tenants faced those pressures alongside Jim Crow segregation, discriminatory law, racial violence, and systematic barriers to land ownership. Black families also occupied and built vernacular houses of many kinds, including forms related to the double pen. Yet preservation histories have often presented these buildings mainly as expressions of white Appalachian or Scots-Irish folk culture. That interpretation is incomplete. Architecture moves between communities. Building skills are shared, adapted, and sometimes imposed. Enslaved craftspeople, free black builders, tenant laborers, and indigenous traditions all contributed to the Southern-built landscape, even when records credited only owners. A house can survive longer than the paperwork identifying everyone who shaped it. The double-pen house therefore belongs to several histories at once. It is a story of settler expansion, a story of folk craftsmanship, a story of family adaptation, a story of poverty, and in many places, a story of the labor systems that replaced slavery without creating equal access to land or housing. The building did not cause those systems, but it helped make them physically possible. Double-pen houses are often described as inexpensive. That is true only if labor is treated as free. The materials could be cheap because timber and stone were gathered locally, but turning those materials into a house demanded skill and time. Trees had to be selected, felled, and trimmed. Logs had to be moved, sometimes with animal power and sometimes by groups of people. Each corner notch had to fit securely enough to prevent the walls from shifting. Openings had to be cut without weakening the structure. Roof timbers had to span the rooms and withstand wind, rain, and occasional snow. A stone chimney required its own knowledge. Poorly built, it could collapse or ignite the house. Built properly, it might survive long after the wooden walls around it disappeared. The idea that log housing was primitive confuses a lack of ornament with a lack of skill. Surviving early structures often contain highly developed joinery. Builders understood how different woods behaved, how logs settled, and how a house should meet uneven ground. This knowledge passed informally. There were no architecture schools involved. Skills traveled through families, neighbors, craftspeople, and local custom. Construction could become a community event. Several people working together might raise walls more quickly than one household alone. Labor could be exchanged rather than purchased, but those exchanges still had value. A family helping to raise a neighbor's house expected help when its own barn needed repair or crops had to be harvested. The rural economy relied on obligation as much as money. After the Civil War, the spread of sawmills and rail connections changed the process. Standardized boards and manufactured nails became more available. Frame or box-built houses could be erected more rapidly. Older log pens were often covered in weatherboards, making them resemble newer cottages. Brick chimneys and metal stoves became more common after the late 19th century. Yet modernization arrived unevenly. A house might receive siding but no plumbing. It might receive electric light decades later while still relying on a well. An indoor bathroom might be built as a rear addition because neither original pen had space for one. Wires remained visible on the walls. Pipes followed awkward routes. Each technology was inserted into a house never designed to contain it. This gradual adaptation is one reason double-pen houses are difficult to identify today. A rear kitchen changes the footprint. A bathroom addition hides the original wall. One front door is removed. The porch is enclosed. The logs disappear behind modern siding. What appears to be an ordinary 20th century cottage may contain an early 19th century structure at its core. The house becomes an archaeological record of a family's changing resources. One room first, a second when possible, a shed when needed, siding when affordable, electricity when the line finally reached the road, plumbing when money and infrastructure allowed. Unlike a mansion completed from a single architectural vision, the double-pen house was rarely finished. It accumulated. Each addition recorded a problem someone had managed to solve. But by the early 20th century, this slow pattern of improvement began to lose status. A new kind of house was arriving, and the double pen's association with hardship became increasingly difficult to escape. By the 1920s and 1930s, American ideas about housing were changing. Pattern books, mail-order catalogs, and national magazines circulated standardized images of domestic success. The modern house had specialized rooms, it had closets, it had a bathroom indoors, it had a kitchen designed around manufactured appliances. The bungalow became especially powerful as an aspirational form. Even a small bungalow could offer a recognizable front entrance, internal circulation, and a floor plan that appeared modern rather than inherited from log construction. Pyramid roof cottages and company-built houses also spread. Compared with these newer forms, the double-pen house began to look old-fashioned. Its two front doors no longer read as orderly, they read as strange. Its porch circulation appeared inconvenient, its lack of plumbing appeared backward. The same house that once announced improvement over a tie, single-room cabin now signaled that its occupants had been left behind. Class prejudice attached itself to the building. Log and plank houses were associated with rural poverty and the stereotype of the uneducated hillbilly. Owners who could afford alterations often concealed the evidence. Logs were covered with siding, porches were rebuilt, one door was removed so the facade would resemble a conventional cottage. An internal opening was cut between the rooms. Rear additions expanded until the original pens became almost invisible. Modernization improved living conditions, but it also erased the house type. Other buildings were simply abandoned. As families left agriculture for mills, mines, factories, or cities, the old house lost its purpose. Roofs failed, porches pulled away from the walls, chimneys stood beside collapsed rooms like monuments to vanished households. Some structures were dismantled for reusable timber. Others were burned. New Deal and post-war housing programs often treated older tenant cabins as substandard structures to be replaced rather than historical buildings to be studied. There were good reasons for that judgment. Many lacked sanitation, safe wiring, and adequate foundations. Preserving a dangerous building exactly as it stood would not have improved the lives of the people still living there, but demolition had a cultural cost. The physical evidence of ordinary rural life began disappearing. This is the central imbalance in architectural preservation. Grand buildings are usually recognized early. They have named architects, wealthy owners, newspaper coverage, and construction records. Their materials appear valuable. Their scale announces importance. A double-pen house possesses few of those advantages. Its builder may be unknown. Its occupants may appear only as marks in a census or farm account. Its alterations make it difficult to date. Its materials appear commonplace. And because the building is associated with poverty, communities may prefer to forget it. The mansion is saved because it represents achievement. The tenant house is demolished because it represents hardship. Yet without the smaller buildings, the mansion's history becomes impossible to understand. One preserved plantation residence can show how an owner lived. The missing cabins reveal how the agricultural system actually functioned. One courthouse can document authority. The vanished rural houses show where the majority of people cooked, slept, raised children, and endured the consequences of that authority. Architecture becomes distorted when only the winner's buildings survive. Late in the 20th century, attitudes began changing again. Scholars of vernacular architecture looked beyond formal styles and prominent designers. They studied barns, cabins, tenant houses, smokehouses, and ordinary streets. The questions changed. Instead of asking only, "Who designed this building?" researchers asked, "How did people actually use it?" They examined tool marks, additions, door placement, and circulation patterns. They treated the house as evidence of behavior. The double-pen house became important precisely because it was ordinary. Its two-room layout revealed how families expanded homes without large amounts of cash. Its porch revealed the importance of outdoor living and social exchange. Its later alterations documented the arrival of sawn lumber, stoves, electricity, and plumbing. Its ownership history exposed differences between self-built independence and landlord-controlled housing. But as scholars recovered these meanings, the market discovered something else. Rustic charm. Old beams, wide floorboards, rough stone chimneys, and full porches became desirable to buyers seeking authenticity. A deteriorated farmhouse could be converted into a weekend retreat. Logs once hidden because they signaled poverty were exposed as decorative features. Modern kitchens and climate systems were installed behind historic walls. Restoration could save the structure. It could also create a new kind of erasure. A real estate description might celebrate simple country living without mentioning that the original household carried water from a spring. A vacation rental might advertise the porch as a place for morning coffee while ignoring the domestic and agricultural work once performed there. Two tiny rooms that had held a large family might be combined into an open-plan living space for two visitors. Poverty became minimalism. Scarcity became simplicity. Manual labor became craftsmanship. The house was no longer dismissed as backward, it was repackaged as authentic. This does not mean old buildings should remain uncomfortable to preserve their history. A house cannot survive indefinitely without a workable modern use. The question is whether adaptation preserves the story or merely the texture. A rough beam is not the full history of the person who cut it. A stone fireplace is not the full history of the child who carried wood to it. A porch is not only a visual feature, it is the place where people worked after returning from other work. Saving the building matters. Saving its discomforting meaning matters too. Double-pen houses face a practical preservation problem. They often stand on land worth more than the structure itself. A developer sees an old house requiring extensive repair. The roof leaks. The foundation has shifted. Termites or moisture have damaged the timber. Modern codes may require electrical, plumbing, and structural upgrades. Demolition is simpler. Even a sympathetic owner can struggle to justify restoration. Insurance may be difficult to obtain. Banks may hesitate to finance a building that does not fit standard assessments. Historical designation can help, but vernacular houses are frequently overlooked by systems designed around architectural distinction. A mansion has exceptional decoration. A double-pen house is important because it was repeated. Its significance lies not in uniqueness but in its connection to a broad pattern of life. That can be harder to communicate. Preservation also becomes selective within rural history itself. Dog-trot houses attract attention because the central breezeway creates a dramatic and recognizable form. Large I houses look more impressive and more obviously historic. Log cabins connect easily to popular frontier mythology. The plain double-pen house sits between these categories. It is not quite unusual enough to become an attraction and not quite grand enough to command immediate respect. Its defining feature may even be removed during renovation. Close one of the two front doors, and much of the house's architectural identity disappears. Enclose the porch, and the circulation system becomes harder to understand. Cover the logs and add several rooms, and the original building vanishes inside its own history. Preserving these houses therefore requires more than keeping the roof standing. It requires teaching people how to read them. Look for two doors beneath one porch. Look for a roof ridge running parallel to the facade. Look for chimneys at the ends or, in some related variants, a central chimney between rooms. Look behind modern siding for older logs. Look for changes in floor level where additions meet the original house. Look for a second room that seems strangely disconnected from the first. These details reveal a design language once understood across much of the rural South. The builders did not need blueprints because the community already knew the grammar. A pen was a word. Two pens formed a sentence. The porch joined them together. So, why did the double-pen house have two front doors? The immediate answer is architectural. Each door entered one of the two side-by-side pens. Because hallways consumed space and cost materials, and because many rooms were originally independent, direct exterior entrances were practical. The doors improved ventilation, they supported flexible use. They allowed one room to serve as a better or more formal space, while the other absorbed everyday family life. But the deeper answer is social. The two doors allowed a small house to perform a larger idea of domestic order. One side could be presented to guests, the other could hold the less orderly reality of beds, work, and crowded family life. The facade suggested separation even when real privacy remained scarce. That is why these houses matter. They show how architecture can offer dignity without solving inequality. A second room genuinely improved life. It created choices that did not exist in a one-room cabin, but it could not provide secure land ownership. It could not free a tenant from debt. It could not reduce the field labor waiting beyond the porch. It could not supply water, insulation, or sanitation. The building was both an achievement and a limit. For an owner-builder, it might mark the moment a family established itself on the land. For a tenant, it might represent shelter controlled by someone else. For a woman managing the household, it offered another room while doubling the number of surfaces, fires, and sleeping spaces that required care. For a landlord, it provided an inexpensive way to house labor. The same floor plan could therefore represent progress, pride, hardship, or control, sometimes all four at once. Imagine one of these houses standing beside a rural road today. The porch leans slightly. One door is missing. Weatherboards have fallen away, exposing logs beneath. Trees press close to the chimney. The field that once supported a household has been divided, replanted, or abandoned. The barn and smokehouse are gone. To someone passing at speed, the building may appear empty. It is not. Its walls contain the sequence of rural Southern history. The earliest logs recall a low-cash settlement economy. The second pen records a family's need for space. Sawn boards reveal the arrival of local mills and rail transport. A brick flue marks the transition from open fireplace to stove. Porcelain fittings or exposed pipes record the late arrival of plumbing. Old electrical wire marks the point when night changed. An enclosed porch reveals changing expectations about interior comfort. Every alteration is a layer of evidence. The house also contains histories that may never be fully recovered. Who cut the logs? Who mixed the chinking? Who slept in the loft? Was the house built by its owner, by neighbors, by enslaved craftspeople, or by tenants whose contribution disappeared from official records? Which door did visitors use? Did the household follow a strict custom or simply enter whichever room was warmer? How many children slept inside? How many people left because the land could no longer support them? The records are uneven. The building cannot answer every question, but once it is demolished, the possibility of asking them becomes smaller. Preservation is not about pretending life was better in the past. It is about refusing to let material evidence vanish simply because the people represented by it lacked wealth. The double pen house does not tell the triumphant version of American expansion. It tells the everyday version. Families built with what they had. They expanded when they could. They made crowded rooms respectable. They turned porches into hallways, workplaces, and social stages. Some gained land and passed it to their children. Others worked for decades on property they would never own. The house accommodated both stories without resolving the distance between them. The double pen house began as one of the simplest improvements imaginable. Take a one-room cabin, add another room beside it, extend the roof, keep both doors. From that modest decision emerged a building type that spread across much of the upland and deep south and sheltered rural families for more than a century. Its two-door facade promised balance, privacy, and progress. Inside, life remained crowded, labor-intensive, and deeply shaped by who controlled the land. That is the dark story behind these houses. They offered just enough space to make hardship appear orderly. They allowed families to build dignity from scarce materials, but they also allowed unequal rural economies to house workers cheaply and keep them close to the fields. Today, their rough logs and long porches may look peaceful, but the buildings were never only picturesque. They were machines sustained by firewood, water hauling, farm labor, unpaid domestic work, and constant repair. And perhaps that is why they deserve to survive. Not because they represent a simpler time. The time was not simple for the people living through it. They deserve to survive because they show how ordinary people adapted, worked, and created homes within limits they did not always choose. The two front doors were not evidence that two families lived there. They were evidence that one small house was trying to become something more. Sometimes it succeeded. Sometimes the appearance of progress was all the rural economy was willing to provide. If you pass one of these houses today, look beyond the leaning porch and faded boards. Behind those two doors is not a forgotten architectural curiosity. It is the story of the South told from the level of the ground.